In this session, we want to talk about, what is revival? What is spiritual awakening? And I use those terms kind of broadly and kind of synonymously. And I really want to zero in for a couple different sessions on the meaning of this whole course, what we're talking about. What is revival? I'm going to begin with an Old Testament scripture, very familiar to almost all of us, but this is kind of an Old Testament definition of revival that we find in 2 Chronicles 7:14, where the scripture says, "If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven, I will forgive their sins, and I will heal their land." That scripture we can unpack from a number of different standpoints. It was said, over 3,000 years ago, but it had to do with the people praying, seeking God, and then God doing a number of things. And that's kind of the essence of revival. Now, I want to begin with a confession. I must admit, in my growing up years and when I was young, I didn't have the foggiest idea what revival was. In fact, I don't ever remember hearing the word in my religious background. I was a part of a mainline denomination, and it wasn't one of the words in the lexicon, We used the term Reformation, and I understood that as a historical event about 500 years ago, but I don't ever remember the word revival ever being shared in my own church context. So it was totally a foreign concept to me. I remember one time traveling through an area of the country. In fact, it was actually the South, southern part of the United States. And I remember seeing a sign on a church. Now, here's a different kind of angle about revival. I remember seeing a sign saying, "Revival Sunday evenings." It was actually on the board, and some of you laugh because you've seen those too before, kind of a series of meetings, revival on Sunday nights. I remember driving a few miles down the road, and I came to another church sign. This is in a place where, of course, there's a lot of churches, and most of them are, I guess you would say, Baptist churches, maybe. And this sign said, "Revival every night except Sunday." So again, I thought to myself, okay, now here's a definition of revival that has to do with one night or other nights or maybe a series of meetings, was kind of the idea there. I also remember being in the state of Florida one time for a convention, and I was with a friend who actually at the time, he was the leader of one of the largest youth campus ministries in America. And his group was having kind of a meeting in a ballroom that was there. And I remember him coming out, and he was real excited. And he walked up to me and he said, "Ron, man, they're having revival in there." And he meant it. And of course, in some ways, I guess they were. But I mean, the point of his statement was, it's really loud in there, and they're really excited. That was kind of his idea of revival was, it wasn't just scheduled meetings, that's the Baptists, He was from a different group. It's really loud, they're going crazy, they're worshiping. And to him, that was his concept of revival. A number of years ago, not that long ago, I was speaking at a conference in East Texas. And when I was there, a friend who's actually a revivalist himself, kind of a well-known speaker, he's done forward to one of my books, kind of as a surprise, he came up just before I shared in this conference, and he actually made a presentation of a special Bible to me, and he dedicated it, and it was really a special thing. And this Bible is called the Revival Study Bible. And the reason it was kind of important to him was he was the main editor in it, and a good friend of his was kind of the one that oversaw the whole thing. And I was really pleased to receive it and excited about it. And we have all kinds of Bibles for all kinds of things, in a study area. And so finally, to kind of went through the window of revival was a really cool thing. And I remember taking it home, and once I got home, and I began to use it one year, a couple different times actually, in my personal devotions. And began to read through the whole thing, Genesis to Revelation. And it had all kinds of wonderful sketches in it about spiritual awakening, about revival. But I also noticed kind of a tendency in the book. And the tendency was, there were all the historical sketches of people we associate with revival, but this particular book and author and main editor kind of saw revival through the window of almost anything that was extremely Pentecostal. So here again was kind of another definition. I noticed him focusing on speaking in tongues and supernatural things, especially, healing evangelists and stuff like that, So again, it got me thinking about the fact that we have all these different kind of meanings and shadings of what revival is, and revival maybe can be kind of broad and different things to different people, that's true, but I realized there was a huge difference between kind of what the conservatives or the Baptists thought about revival, and then there was another definition to what the kind of the Pentecostals think about revival. And in my background, nobody knew nothing about revival. So I'd never even heard about it, and on and on and on and on. So, the question kind of came down to me in my early years, well, okay, I've seen these signs, so is revival something that can be organized? I mean, can it be a series of meetings that we have? Can we set up the sign and say we're going to have a revival? That's a good question. Does revival, kind of imply, loudness and excitement and, newness in that sense? That seemed to be something common to a number of the definitions. Or, is revival, supernatural only, kind of just the Pentecostal element? Well, as I've pondered this kind of over a lifetime, I've come to the conclusion that the answer is yes. In some ways, and in some forms. And God moves kind of differently among different people because we have different personality styles, persuasions, a lot of different things. That is true. And there are a number of elements that we're going to talk about tonight that are a part of revival and spiritual awakening that seem common to them all. But all of those definitions are a little bit weak. They're a little bit narrow, and they're kind of tailored toward a certain style or a certain kind of denomination. And I believe especially that full-blown revival, let me even say it that way, or I'll use the term historic revival, I believe is much bigger than all of those. And I also believe it has 3 clear elements to it. And in these next few sessions, I want to get into what is a historic revival, and what are those 3 things that have to be there to actually call it a spiritual awakening.